Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome here in the room and online to the 2023 Annual General Meeting of Antisense Therapeutics. My name is Charmaine Gittleson, and I am the Chair of Antisense. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome our board members who this year we have in the room and in the country with us. So firstly, I'll start on the side. So Dr. James Garner, Dr. Gil Price, and welcome. Thank you for making the trip here. And next to him is our Company Secretary, Mr. Philip Haynes, and our Co-Secretary, Alicia, is in the back there. Thank you very much. I'd also like to welcome our audit partner from Ernst & Young, Matt Burnett, and of course our corporate lawyer, James Hutton from Minter Ellison, and thanks to Minter Ellison for allowing us to use this facility. So this year, the meeting will begin by a brief address by myself, less than what I usually have to say, because I want to give the opportunity to our Managing Director and CEO, Dr. James Garner, to be able to present to you. And after that, we will have a general question and answer session, so general business question and answer session. Then we will go to the formal part of the meeting, and I will present the resolutions, or Mr. Philip Haynes will present the resolutions, and then we will have questions around the resolutions. Okay, so there'll be two parts of questioning. Voting today will be conducted by way of a poll on all items of business, and in order to provide you with enough time to vote, voting is now open on all resolutions and will close at the end of the meeting. You should have a screen for those of you online that will give you some guidance. If you are eligible to vote at this meeting, the voting tab will be visible on the screen, and you select that tab to bring up a list of resolutions, which will present you with the voting options. To cast your vote, simply select one of the options. There is no need to hit or submit an enter button. The vote will be automatically recorded. You do, however, have the ability to change your vote up until voting is closed at the end of the meeting. Okay, I am going to move on from now to my chair address, which I'm going to use some notes to read to you because we want to make sure we cover everything here. Okay, so again, on behalf of the Board of Directors and the management team, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this annual general meeting. We are grateful for this opportunity to meet with those of you that have managed to come here in person. And for those that are unable to attend, we're pleased to have been able to offer this as a virtual meeting. At last year's AGM, we announced a change in our strategy, and that was our intention to launch an international phase 2b clinical trial of our lead asset ATL1102 for the treatment of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. As you're aware, that study was altered from the previously announced study, which was to be a phase 3 for EMA, a much larger study. I'm pleased to say that the study, the phase 2b, started during this year and is now well underway, with data expected in the second half of calendar year 2024. James will speak to this in more detail. While it's still early days, we have been very pleased by the engagement of our investigators, those that are already enrolling and those that are just really waiting to get their sites up and ready. And it's great to see the enthusiasm amongst the families and the boys that have come onto study and have remained on study. In fact, our first boy will be coming to the end of his dosing in the placebo-controlled part, and will be continuing into the open label fairly soon. And we're also pleased by the initial evaluations of the Data Safety Monitoring Board that we have put in place, who have supported the continuing recruitment into the study. As you're aware, in parallel, we launched the 9-month chronic toxicology monkey study, human primate study. That is being done as part of the regulatory requirements to move the program forward within the jurisdiction of the FDA. Dosing is expected to be completed by the end of this year, and as that data is a key component of our engagement with the FDA, we will be waiting with bated breath for that data, which will come towards the end of the second half of next year. It does take time to be able to get all the samples from the monkeys, a lot of which are tissue samples, which have to be specially prepared, and that takes time and then they are read. And then we will take the results and move forward and engage with the regulators. And we hope that will open us up to being able to do future clinical trials and in due course, a marketing authorization in the United States, the world's largest pharmaceutical market. So these developments reflect the coming together of our work over the last several years. And we've patiently been building the foundation of Antisense's future success. And in the next 12 months, we believe that we will begin to reap the harvest of those efforts. And success will see ATL1102 move substantially closer to becoming a commercialized pharmaceutical product, where we hope it makes a material difference in the lives of patients and families who are impacted by this devastating disease. They're exciting developments, and moreover, it's been gratifying to see our enthusiasm reflected in the commitment and confidence of our investors. As you are aware, in July and August, we raised approximately 11.5 million Australian dollars from new and existing shareholders, and those proceeds leave us well positioned to execute on the ongoing clinical trial. We believe strongly that the company's work in DMD is important and that ATL1102 deserves every opportunity to become a new treatment option for patients. And it's the support of our investors that makes that possible. And we are tremendously grateful for your involvement and your engagement. Nevertheless, I should note that we do envisage a future for this organization that is broader and deeper than one drug in a single disease area, no matter how promising that drug may be. As the board has reflected on the opportunities before us, we have recognized that ATL1102 has potential applicability to other inflammatory disorders. And even beyond ATL1102, we feel that the expertise and relationships that the company is now developing have started to become assets in their own right. And there's much more that we may do to add value to our company in the future. And I look forward to sharing with you some of these ambitious aspirations in due course. For now, however, we are, my favorite words, we are laser focused on the development of ATL1102 in DMD. It is the absolute first priority for our team. And I can assure you that every single member of the Antisense team is working daily towards the success of this critical project. The resurgence of ATL1102 over the 12 past months has been accompanied by a revitalization in the company itself. We will never cease to be proud of its heritage. We acknowledge, and we have in the room today, some of the founding members of this organization, Mr. Leon Siri and Mr. Bob Moses, and thank you for coming in. We build on what they handed to us, and we remain grateful to the contributions of them and many others over the years of this company. However, it's no exaggeration to say that we have undergone a fresh start this past year. You see in front of you a new team lead. There are some new members of the team who are working back at the office. And you see a developing new strategy and a rediscovered sense of purpose. Against this backdrop, the board has resolved to also adopt a new name for the company. And as you're aware, one of the resolutions that we seek to ask for your support today is to rename the company to Percheron Therapeutics Limited. I know that there is sentimental value in the name of Antisense, and I know that there are individuals who feel very strongly about that enduring. However, I want you to be assured that the board has not taken this step lightly. The company is about to embark on a new chapter of its existence, one which may see it become, in the fullness of time, a commercial pharmaceutical business. It behoves us to present ourselves fresh and renewed to investors, partners, clinicians, and other stakeholders. And we've received that feedback very clearly. I'm not going to expound today on the meaning of the new name, whether it's the right name, whether it implies various different aspects of a business. Actually, in the end of the day, it's a name. It's what we do with the company and with its name that's important. I will say only that it will come to mean what we make it mean. People will, over time, I trust, recognize in our efforts, recognize our conduct, and recognize our achievements, and that today's renaming provides a blank canvas on which we can paint the future of the company. And all of us are profoundly enthusiastic to take up this new challenge. Before closing, I want to pay tribute to our former CEO, Mark Diamond, who, as you know, has stepped down last year at the AGM. Mark steered Antisense patiently for more than 2 decades and retired, as you know, in May this year. I hope, Mark, that you're somewhere having fun. His efforts have brought us to where we are today, and on behalf of the board, I want to again thank him for his contributions to our organization. And with that, I'd like to look to the future and pleased to formally welcome Dr. James Garner, who's joined the company as CEO of August in this year and has already made a significant difference. For now, I'll just say that he brings to this role enormous enthusiasm for his work and an absolute commitment to seeking new treatment options for patients. And we're enjoying working with you and your energy, and I look forward to working together. To conclude, the year ahead may well be the most important in our company's history. It is a defining moment. Data from the ongoing clinical trial is going to provide us the raw material to build on the future of Hirschhorn Therapeutics. But it's going to be the skill and the commitment of the team that will ultimately shape that raw material into a successful business. And we are resolutely committed to that task. So on behalf of the board, I want to again thank all our shareholders for their continuing support of the company. And we look forward to continuing this journey with you in the year ahead. With that, I would like to invite James to please come up and do the presentation on the company business.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As you know, I'm James Garner. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Antisense Therapeutics, and it's wonderful to be here today. This is my first annual general meeting since joining the company in August. I'd just like to make a brief personal comment and thank everybody for the very warm welcome since I came on board 3 months ago. Since joining, I've had the opportunity to speak to many dozens of our shareholders, and without exception, I've been really struck by how generous they've been with their time, how gracious they've been with their welcome, and how candid they've been with their feedback. And one can ask for nothing more as an incoming CEO, and so I'm very grateful and, of course, extremely excited to be here. Next slide, please. And next slide. Thank you. Now, what I like to do at AGMs is to try and provide a sort of year in review digest of the last 12 months for the company. And there's been an enormous amount happening within Antisense and also outside Antisense. And so in the next 20, 30 minutes, I want to try and give you a little bit of an overview of some of the key things that have been happening. And I'd be delighted to take questions, but I'm going to ask, if I may, that we hold questions until after the presentation, just to make sure that we get through all the material here and do justice to all the things that are on everybody's minds. So with that said, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about 1102. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. This is a very busy overview of the key priorities that we've been focused on for 1102. And the reason the slide is busy is because we've been busy. There's a great deal happening with 1102. I've often heard in my career companies use the term laser focused. I've never seen a company mean it quite as much as this company does, because this really is what we live and breathe every day. And right now, there's 5 main things that we're spending our time on with 1102. And I've tried to sort of itemize them here. So absolutely, our number 1 priority is the ongoing phase 2b randomized controlled trial of the drug in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And I think everybody in the room should be reasonably familiar with this study. Where we are right now, as we shared in our recent quarterly filings, as of 31st of October, we had 10 patients recruited to the study. It's been picking up a little bit in the last month or two, which has been really encouraging to see. As you've just heard, one of the things we really pay a lot of attention to is the early feedback from clinicians and the more formal evaluations of the Data Safety Monitoring Board. These are absolutely crucial elements of a study like this. It's been really encouraging that so far so good. The Data Safety Monitoring Board is happy with the conduct and progress of the study, and the feedback from clinicians has been enthusiastic and extremely positive. So we're pretty happy in general with how the study's going. We'll say a little bit about recruitment in just a moment. Next key milestones for that study, we're aiming to finish recruitment in the first quarter of next year, and that'll position us for data in the second half of next year, which is in line with our previous guidance. We're also conducting a 9-month non-human primate toxicology study, or in everyday language, monkeys. And this is something that's a routine part of development for a drug like this, something that often companies don't even talk about doing. But as you'll be aware, it's something that has inadvertently become something of a rate-limiting step for us to get the drug into the United States. So we've shared a little bit more detail about that. That study will finish dosing the animals next month. The last monkey will be dosed in mid-December. Now, just to manage expectations, we then have what we call a recovery period for some of the animals. We want to see that any changes we do observe revert to normal afterwards. So that takes a few months. And then, as you've heard, it takes a few months to do all the analysis and to look at all the organ systems of the animals under the microscope. So we're currently expecting data sort of in the middle of next year. We've said, I think, second half of next year, and that's fine. That's in line with everything else. That's not going to hold us up in any of the other things that we need to do. We're also taking the opportunity with some new people on the team to go back and look at all the work that's been done with 1102 and work out what else needs to be done to optimize this for a potential future marketing authorization. We all talk about clinical trials, and that's obviously the big ticket item. That's the most exciting part of the work we do. But there's a lot of other things that go into a new drug application, and we're making sure that we've got our ducks in a row so that when the time comes, when we have positive clinical data in hand, we're in the best possible position to engage with regulatory agencies. So there's a lot of that work just going back over everything that's been done over the last 2 decades, fine-tuning all that to make sure we're ready for prime time. One observation I had coming into the organization is that the company has generated some really exciting data around this asset, but a lot of that data is not widely available. Some of it only really exists in ASX announcements. Unfortunately, clinicians, researchers, potential partners, even many investors don't really read ASX announcements. So we've been focused on getting this data into international scientific conferences and into peer-reviewed scientific journals. That's where it belongs. That's where it's going to have the maximum impact. So in particular, one of the things my colleague George Takas, who's here with us today, has been working on is getting all this legacy data, but in particular, the great data we saw with the earlier phase 2A study in Duchenne's disease, published in good quality journals. And so we'll be sharing that with you as it comes through, because I think this is really important work. And then last but not least, we've got we're trying to get out there and engage better with our stakeholders, with clinicians, with not-for-profit groups, with Duchenne's groups. We're really trying to put the company's story in front of the broadest range of people. So this is what's keeping us busy. And as I say, there's a lot going on. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to refresh everybody's memory about the ongoing phase 2b study. Very briefly, this is a randomized controlled trial. This is the highest standard of clinical evidence that we can present to a regulatory agency. This is what regulators generally want to see from us. It's a placebo-controlled study, so there are patients in the study who will get treated in exactly the same way, except that they won't get 1102, and that gives us a really precise way to compare the effect of the drug. Gives us really solid data. As you recall, we're looking here at non-ambulant boys. That is roughly half of the total Duchenne's population. And these are kids who, sadly, the disease has progressed to a stage where they are generally wheelchair-bound. That's the same population we looked at in the earlier phase 2a study. And the primary endpoint, again, 6 months after the last patient in, we're looking at this PUL 2.0 measure of upper limb function. This isn't going to be one of these studies that takes 4 or 5 years to generate data. We're going to have data next year, and that's an exciting place to be. Next slide, please. And I've just put this slide in because I can't get enough of talking about this slide. I was always almost thinking about trying to get it as a tattoo because this is such wonderful data. This is the results of our earlier phase 2a study in Duchenne's disease. And in particular, you can see really green across the board there in the ATL 1102 group. But in particular, the thing that really excited me coming into the company was the PUL 2.0 data. We see that difference, 2.9 difference between the treated group and the matched historical controls. And this is a big change. And if, as I've said before, if this is replicated in the ongoing randomized phase 2b study, we think that's going to be a very, very exciting outcome indeed. So as I say, this is strong data. We're going to be really putting this in front of everybody we possibly can over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. And I think this sets us up really nicely for results from the phase 2b. Next slide, please. Finally, I just want to say a word about recruitment, and I'll just make the observation that recruitment to clinical trials is a bugbear for the industry as a whole, not just for Antisense, but for Pfizer, for GSK, for Lilly, for AstraZeneca. Recruiting to clinical trials is enormously difficult. And on the left of the slide, you see some recent metrics just for interest's sake. This is drawn from about 3,500 industry-sponsored phase 3 studies. And as you can see, over just an 8-year period, the average recruitment rate to these clinical trials has dropped by about a third. And so as a result, companies have had to compensate with larger and longer studies. And so this is a problem across the industry. And unsurprisingly, it's been a modest issue for us in the early days of this study. As you can see, we're already taking steps to mitigate this. We've made a few tweaks and adjustments to the protocol that make it a little bit simpler to bring patients in and make sure we're not screening anybody out unnecessarily. We're looking at adding a couple of additional sites, in particular in the United Kingdom and in Turkey. We think there's some really enthusiastic sites that can open quickly and make a good contribution to the study. We're really spending a lot of time with the investigators. One of my colleagues just got back from a week in the UK, meeting with all of our sites, a kind of whirlwind tour of the UK. And that's been enormously helpful. There's nothing that investigators appreciate more than having the sponsor turn up in person and watch over them as they do the work. And we've also been trying to engage with muscular dystrophy groups and with advocacy groups to solicit their help in terms of just channeling patients into the study. And then finally, just in recent weeks, we're looking at the possibility of adding a new country to the study. This is still work in progress, but Gil Price has some great relationships in a European country with some very, very influential clinicians. They ordinarily, it's too slow a process to bring a new country into a study like this. But thanks to the support of these senior clinicians, this has been escalated to the very highest levels of government. And so we're working this through. We'll see what we can make happen. But if we're able to bring these guys on board, we'll look forward to sharing that with you when we do so. So that's what we're doing with 1102. As I say, there's a lot of work ongoing, but we're really excited with the progress we're making. Next slide, please. So I'm going to shift gears now and talk a little bit about Duchenne's disease and about some of the things that have been happening in the broader environment. Of course, we're not the only people working in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And I think it's quite a good opportunity at a forum like this to look back at some of the things that have happened over the year in the broader treatment landscape. So next slide, please. So this is really the last 9 or 12 months or so in Duchenne's. And the year started well with some data from a company called Capricor in the United States. They presented 18-month data from their HOPE-2 study. That's an extended phase 2 study of their rather quirky cell therapy product, CAP1002. And this is noteworthy so as much as anything because of what happened almost immediately afterwards. The next month, in February, they signed a licensing deal with Nippon Shinyaku, a Japanese pharmaceutical company, for Japanese rights to CAP1002. They received, I think, $12 million in the upfront and then generous milestones based upon success of the product. Now, obviously, this deal didn't start cold in January. In fact, Nippon Shinyaku's US subsidiary already holds the US rights. No doubt this has been under discussion for some time. But what this illustrates to me is how quickly data can precipitate partnering interest. And this is something we're very, very far from oblivious to. My colleague, Anthony Philippus, has been out there pounding the pavement, really trying to raise awareness of Antisense and ATL1102, so that as our program matures, as ATL1102 moves forward, we are in the best possible position to grab these kinds of opportunities and to put the drug in front of potential partners. So we take a lot of inspiration from that work earlier in the year. As we move through, I think there's another sort of pair of events that, in a sense, illustrates both the positives and negatives of drug development. This is a challenging industry for those of us that work in it and for those of you that invest in it. In June, a company called Fibrogen, one of the few companies developing drugs in non-ambulant boys with EMD, announced negative data from their LELANTOS-1 study. And that's had, unfortunately, the consequences one would imagine for the company. But it's really demonstrated, I think, some of the challenges associated with this disease. It's not easy to make new drugs for Duchenne's. And it has also, in passing, removed one of the key competitors for ATL1102 in the non-ambulant space. Much better news came just a week or two later. Sarepta, one of the key companies in Duchenne's, announced the approval of their new gene therapy drug. It has the catchy name delandistrogene moxeparvovec. So understandably, they've given it a brand name, Elevidys. And Elevidys is one of the first gene therapies ever approved, and certainly the first in this disease. When I was a young doctor, this kind of thing was science fiction, and it's incredible to see the scientific achievement that this represents. But for reasons we'll come to, we see this as being a relatively small product in the broad landscape of Duchenne's. This is certainly not something that we think is going to change the treatment of the disease overnight. And so I think we're filled with respect for the science here, but I think fundamentally this doesn't change the opportunity and the value we see in 1102. One thing that happened again very quickly after this, Sarepta received a pediatric priority review voucher for the approval of Elevidys. They immediately sold it for $102 million US. And for those that have been following the Antisense story closely, you'll be aware that we have rare pediatric disease designation for 1102. That is the key enabling regulatory designation to receive a pediatric priority review voucher. If we are able to get the drug approved by FDA, we should receive one of these too. And we will almost certainly do exactly what Sarepta's done and sell it for something like that sum of money. So I think it's very good to see this this strategy working out so well in Sarepta's case. September, PTC Therapeutics, another company in the industry, had some negative news from the European Medicines Agency, the CHMP. They declined to renew the conditional approval of their drug Translarna, Asalurin. And I think this illustrates something that's been emerging over the last couple of years, these so-called exon-skipping therapies, around which there was so much hope and expectation in the early days, have not really been the game-changing therapies that I think were originally hoped for. And I think that's reflected here in the EMA's actions around Translarna, and I think really shows a rebalancing of thinking among the Duchenne's community back towards other ways of treating the disease, in particular anti-inflammatory therapies like 1102. The tide, in short, is moving in our direction. And to illustrate that, in October, we saw FDA approval of vamorolone. This drug's been in development for a while. It's a steroid. It's a fancy steroid, but it's a steroid. And it's used to damp down inflammation in patients with Duchenne's, which in a fundamental sense is exactly what we're trying to do with 1102. So we see this as, again, really encouraging that we're on the right track, where we're trying to do something that makes sense to the community. And then finally, just a couple of weeks ago, we saw initial data from the EMBARK study of Elevidys in Duchenne's, and that study failed to meet its primary endpoint. And again, I think this shows there is no one magic bullet in a disease like Duchenne's. Even gene therapy, for all its scientific promise, is not the single thing that's going to change the landscape. There is room for there is room and need for a lot of new therapies in this disease. And that's why we're here. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's a very brief digest of some of the key things that have been happening in Duchenne's over the past year. It's been a busy year for the space. And if we can move on 2 slides, I want to talk a little bit about the other side of the coin here, which is capital markets. Of course, we're a listed company, as you well know. And what happens in the broader market environment is also tremendously relevant to our organization. And I want to begin by acknowledging that we are now about 2 years into a profound bear market for biotech companies. This has been an incredibly challenging period. I just got back from a couple of weeks in the United States. I met with over a dozen Wall Street bankers. Every one of them was saying that they had never seen anything quite like this. As you can see in the left-hand panel of the slide, capital inflows to the biotech sector and number of transactions have been radically diminished over the last couple of years. Even partnering activity in the middle panel has been very, very much more subdued than we would normally see. But I think the good news is that we're starting to see a break in the clouds. And I've shown in the right-hand panel there IPO activity in biotech, which, as you can see, over the last 4 or 5 quarters has been picking up quite noticeably. This is often a kind of early indicator of capital inflows coming back into the sector, and I think is extremely encouraging. We're all hoping for a much better 2024 than 2023, and so we'll watch the space, of course, but we think it's time for spring in the biotech sector. Next slide, please. Now, I've zoomed in here on the Duchenne's landscape specifically. So this slide shows stock market performance for ourselves and a number of companies since the beginning of this year. Antisense is the red line on the chart, and you can see our performance over the course of the year here. And the blue line shows the XBI, which may be familiar to many people in the room. It's a sort of de facto index for small cap biotech companies. It's a US-based index. The Australian sector is really too thin to make a meaningful index out of it. But the US has thousands of such companies. And so XBI is used generally as the index of reference for companies like ours. And as you can see, XBI is down about 20% over the course of this year. Antisense a little bit more than that. And as you can see, for the whole Duchenne's landscape, it's the year has had its ups and downs. The companies that have enjoyed the most success, companies like Santhera, have done so off the back of regulatory approvals and positive data. Even Sarepta frankly, the 800-pound gorilla of the Duchenne's field is down almost 50% year to date. And sadly, the line you see right down at the bottom of the chart there, that's FibroGen. Their drug Havrelimab failed not just in non-ambulant Duchenne's, but also ambulant and in interstitial pulmonary fibrosis. $1 invested in that company is today worth about 3 cents. And so we've seen how data and regulatory activity really drives the fortunes of companies. And in that context, of course, with our data coming out next year, this is a tremendously important year ahead for Antisense. I think what's positive here, though, is that investors remain extremely excited and engaged with this disease area. Quite candidly, my last company was a brain cancer company. Investors are tired of brain cancer, but they are extremely interested to hear about stories like ours. And I think that's reflected on the next slide in the recent financing that our company was able to put away in July and August of this year. And huge props to the teams at Morgan's here for a really excellent financing round. As you'll know, we raised gross proceeds of $11.5 million divided between an institutional placement in July, share purchase plan in August. That raise was done at a 23% discount, which is very much better terms than the average transaction going through in Australia. And as you can see, our performance post-transaction has been one of the best in the Australian biotech landscape this year. So once again, we are hugely grateful for your support. This makes possible everything the company does, and I think really shows the enthusiasm of both institutional investors and retail investors for the company's story. Next slide, please. Finally, I want to just spend 1 or 2 minutes talking about the year ahead for the company, and then I'd be really delighted to take any questions. So if we can move on to the next slide. We've been busy. We've been really trying to invest a lot of time and energy in getting the company's story out there, getting it in front of as many people as possible. I'll be completely honest with you and say Antisense is not as well known as it should be, and we're going to fix that. And we've been doing it through a whole range of different ways. We've been out there talking to equity research analysts, and you can see some of the coverage that's been coming through, been out there providing content for professional investors, for more retail-focused investors. We've had in-person meetings in August and September with some of our shareholders. We've been doing everything we possibly can to get the story out there. And this is going to continue. And you can see some of the things we're going to be focused on as we head into calendar 2024. We're going to be doing roadshows here in the United States to, again, really try and get the engagement of institutional investors. We're going to be reaching out to analysts. They're such an important gatekeeper for getting into professional investment, into the mind of professional investors. We're going to be doing more open house meetings, more video content, things like that. Once again, getting our data out there is so important, and that's something we're going to be very focused on. And then finally, a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, our company website is a brave effort, but I don't think it does justice to the company. So you'll be seeing some changes in the company website over the next few months. We want that to be really something that we can be really proud of and that will be incredibly useful to you as shareholders. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things we're going to be doing as part of that, as you've already heard in the chair's address, is we're proposing to change the name of the company. And I've been through 3 or 4 corporate rebrandings, and they're always disconcerting. They're unsettling. We're also used to calling the company Antisense. It becomes second nature. And as soon as we start calling it anything else, that feels pretty weird for a period of time. Having been through this exercise before, that feeling lasts for about 2 or 3 months, after which we'll forget the company was ever named anything else. But we will have a little transition to go through, both us in the company and you as shareholders in the company. So I want to talk a minute or two about why we're putting you through that and why we've decided this is something that's important enough to take the time with today. And I'll say to start with that this is a pretty common occurrence for companies. Companies often change their brand and change their identity as as they evolve. And as you can see, I've put a couple of examples on the left side of the slide here. And I don't know about you, but Blue Ribbon Sports Air Jordans doesn't have the same ring to it as a pair of Nikes. I'm sure IT procurement people the world over are really glad that the computing, tabulating, and reporting company changed its name to IBM. I'm a child of a certain generation, so I slightly regret that I didn't spend my youth carrying around a Tokyo Tsushin Hyogyo Walkman. But I would have to say Sony is a better brand. And look, the less said about back rub, the better. And as for Pete's Super Submarines, I'm sure sandwich artists all around the world are very glad that that company is now called Subway. This is an everyday thing that companies go through as part of their growth, part of their maturation. When this company was founded, antisense oligonucleotides were a very, very new technology, and the company was rightly very proud of its pioneering role in this. And it signed a really unique arrangement with ISIS Pharmaceuticals, which of course has itself since rebranded for obvious reasons. And the rightful pride of the company in the extraordinary achievements around its inception were reflected in the name. And indeed, at the time, it was not that unusual for biotech companies to be named after their underlying technology. Amgen, one of the largest biotech companies in the world, was originally Applied Molecular Genetics. But in the 20-something years since, it has become less common for companies to name themselves after their underlying technology. Just as we don't see car companies called internal combustion engine motors, and just as we don't see IT companies called 5-nanometer semiconductor fabrication computers, it's a little quirky, a little eccentric, perhaps even a little old-fashioned these days for companies to foreground their technology in this sort of way. And for the many people who come to the story new, who don't know what an antisense oligonucleotide is, I'm afraid to say the word sounds suspiciously like nonsense. We come across to new shareholders as nonsense therapeutics. And that is a problem. It's something we have to be mindful of. We've been very thoughtful about this, and we've spent a lot of time considering this and debating this and really trying to think this through. We're about to embark on a program of really trying to raise the company's profile. I have to say, in all honesty, the company is not well known at the moment. Sadly, there is not a wealth of brand equity and familiarity in the existing name. And we're going to change that. We're going to get out there and we're going to tell everybody we possibly can about the company. But if we're going to invest that energy in building a brand, and we're not starting from zero, but we're starting from way back in the peloton, it makes sense to just think very carefully before we start on that journey about what is the brand we want to share. And as I say, the Antisense brand isn't well known. For those that do know it, the company is certainly not reviled. We're not Qantas. But it's seen as being a company that's been around for a long time and maybe hasn't yet achieved all the things that were hoped of it. And that's a headwind. That's something we have to be mindful of as we think about how to share the company's story. And so with all these things put together, we've decided that it's better to relaunch the company with a new brand, a new name, and to take that out fresh as we put the company in the market. Now, I just want to say, echo a point that was made a couple of minutes ago. I'm conscious that there are many people in the audience who are emotionally invested in the existing brand of the company. A couple of people who achieved extraordinary things in building this company in its early days. And we mean no disrespect. We are filled with respect and admiration and gratitude every day for the work that has gone into this company. But it is time for it to start a new chapter. And that is what we want to do today with Percheron Therapeutics. And that's why we've put this in front of you today in the AGM. Next slide, please. Just to finish, I'm going to look forward a little bit further to one or two more slides just to what's ahead for us now. I've mentioned already we will be seeing data out of the phase 2b study in the second half of next year. Where could that data take us? Well, there's really three broad possibilities for any trial readout. One is that it's unambiguously positive. And you can bet that if that's the case, we'll be on the first plane to the US to go and talk to the FDA about this and about how we can start to line this drug up for potential marketing authorization. More commonly at this stage of a drug's development, we get positive signals, but they need some interpretation and discussion. We need to sit down with clinicians, understand it better. We sit down with regulatory agencies and understand their view on it. And we'll be ready to do that work as well. And then, of course, we wouldn't be honest if we didn't recognize the possibility any clinical trial can surprise us with a negative result. And so part of what we're doing is to make sure that in that scenario, we understand why we're in the best possible place to reposition the drug and find new opportunities for it to bring benefit to patients. As I've said many times, ATL-1102 is not just a Duchenne's drug. This has potential across a wide range of inflammatory diseases, and we want to make sure it fulfills all that potential. And as we touched on a moment ago, the opportunity for a pediatric priority review voucher is real, and this is something you can bet that we will seize if we possibly can. Next slide, please. Finally, I just want to say a word about partnering. As I mentioned, my colleague, Anthony Philippis, has been extraordinarily busy putting the company in front of absolutely anybody who will hear. And this is a long courtship. Partnering deals usually take 12 months or more to consummate. By the time you see the press release, there's been 12 months, 15 months, 18 months of work that has gone into it. But we want to do that work now. We want to do that groundwork. We want to build that familiarity among potential partners so that we can move when the time is right. And so I just wanted to start a process of orienting shareholders to what pharmaceutical partnering looks like and how this could work. So on the left side of the slide, showing the architecture of a typical pharmaceutical partnering deal is usually an upfront payment at the time of signing, and that's not at risk. We receive that money when we sign the agreement. There's then some amount of milestone payments which are linked to certain events in the development of the drug, things like an FDA approval, first $100 million of sales, that sort of thing. And then there's usually royalties on net sales, so some share of the value of the product in the commercial market. Now, there's an almost infinite number of ways to structure these things, but most are variations on this theme. What do things look like? Well, we've shown some metrics here of most, if not all, of the rare disease phase 2 deals that have been done in the last sort of 6 or 7 years. And there's 47 comparable deals. We've worked with some advisors in the United States to pull this data together. We see median upfront payment of $18 million US, $200 million in milestones, and 15% royalties. Now, individual mileage will vary. So that is not to say that this is our expectation or our guidance or our limit or our floor for anything we might do for 1102. But this is the average, and I think it's a good point of reference for all of us as we start to think about what the future looks like for 1102. Next slide, please. Last of all, I just want to conclude with this slide. This is our list of milestones. These are the events that we most want to draw to your attention and that we think are most important in building the value of the company. We've hit most of what we expect to happen in calendar 2023 at this stage. Looking ahead to 2024, you can see some of the key things that you should be looking out for. Full recruitment to the study, where we're currently expecting first quarter. Completion of the in-life phase of the 9-month non-human primate toxicology study, publication of our phase 2A data, and then in the second half of the year, perhaps one of the most important moments in this company's history, the 6-month data from our ongoing phase 2b study in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is an exciting year ahead for the company. It is a tremendously important year for the company. I want to thank you once again on behalf of everybody at Antisense for all your support and your engagement. And we look forward to sharing the journey with you. And with that, I'd be very happy to take questions. Okie dokie.
Yes, so I have 3 questions from our online participants, one of which was around partnership and 2 around the US focus. So I'll start with the first one with regards to the partnership, which came in from Samuel Angelico. Just wanting to know the status of the Ionis partnership agreement around 1102 and 1103 and whether it had expired as yet or whether it plans to be expiring.
Yeah. So I'll repeat the questions just to make sure everybody hears. The question there was around our partnership with Ionis, the current status of that. There's been 1 or 2 Ionis patents that have expired and they're going to expire. Our arrangement with Ionis is still strong and enduring. I actually met with them recently in Carlsbad, California. They're still very excited by the work we're doing. They're still extremely engaged with the company. We're looking at ways to develop and fine-tune that relationship. I think obviously this is a relationship that dates back over several decades, and like both companies, has evolved a great deal in that time. So I'd say we've got active discussions about how best to work together to ensure success for 1102, and that's ongoing. I think nothing particularly life-changing to share today, but we're certainly talking to them regularly and working out how best to serve the needs of both companies.
Our second question from Samuel was with regards to the US, the patient and advocacy conversations that are being had with the company.
Yes. So again, question was around advocacy, particularly in the United States, and which, to be honest, is where the whole practice of patient advocacy, I think, is most well developed. We're absolutely reaching out. Gil Price, in particular, has some great relationships already with groups like PPMD, Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. I think Charmaine's been in touch with Muscular Dystrophy Association. We have plans for next year to really deepen and enrich our engagement with some of those groups. And so watch this space. It's an important market for us to build awareness in, and the advocacy groups are a vital part of that. So we'll be doing a lot more work with them in the year ahead.
Our final question from our online community is from Mr. Dean Kelly. He's got a general question with regards to the investment in paid research around the US roadshows. On face value, it doesn't seem that we've had materiality positive impact on our share price over the time or enabled the profile of the business to swim against the tide in terms of overall market. He's wondering what the business is looking at doing with the new leadership team and what the focus will be, and whether there's consideration of return on interest with regards to these roadshows, etc.
Thanks, Alicia. So again, just to summarize the question, it's around paid research and perhaps, if I can read between the lines, the value, the return on investment of some of the IR activities in the US. Right now, we don't have any paid research relationships. All the research that's been provided around the company is, for want of a better term, organic. So we're not spending anything. And in fact, we're not really spending anything on investor relations consultants and so on at all. Because I think it's a fair point that sometimes just engaging consultants by itself doesn't necessarily open a lot of doors. I think investor relations is something we as a company need to own. So I mentioned I was just in the United States for a couple of weeks. I met with a great number of analysts, bankers, fund managers, but that was work that we organized ourselves. It wasn't work we paid an IR firm to do. It was work that we initiated. There is a time and a place for sponsored research. There is a time and a place for IR support and consultants and advisors, but we want to use them very strategically, and we do want to make sure, as the question alluded to, that we get good return on investment. So we'll be very, very much more focused and very much more strategic in terms of how we use those resources. As I say, there's a time and a place for everything, but we're going to make sure we get bang for buck. Turn now to ask if there's any questions in the room.
You mentioned that third or fourth last slide, how you would react to the point to big responses to the study, and the first would be clearly a good result. Can you describe what you would describe, what you measure as a good result?
What does a good result look like? That's a great question. Look, it's a difficult question. It's a very good question. It's a very difficult question to answer, because the reality for any drug at this stage of development is that it's really the totality of the evidence rather than one particular point. So we've talked a lot about this pool 2.0 measure, this scale that we're using, because we think that's the approval endpoint for the drug, and there's plenty of precedent and support for that. But in reality, that information will never stand alone. Regulatory agencies are just as keen to understand the safety profile of the drug. They're just as keen to understand whether the drug works similarly for all patients or whether it just works for a subset. So it's very, very hard to say that there's a single numerical threshold that if we get the drug over, it's 100% a slam dunk, and if we don't hit it, we're out of the picture. It really is a bespoke assessment of the totality of the evidence. Having said that, I think if we see data comparable to what we saw in the phase 2A study, where you'll remember there's a 2.9 point difference at 6 months in the pool 2.0 score between ATL 1102 and the matched historical controls, we see that sort of magnitude of difference. We certainly think that will be an extremely exciting result. And on present evidence, touch wood, the drug appears really quite non-toxic. And so long as that continues, I think we'll be extremely encouraged. So look, it's going to be a careful consideration of all the data that we receive, but it's that sort of picture, something that looks a lot like the phase 2A study. I think I'd say so far so good. Having said that, these studies they're pretty routine. I mean, I don't think anybody's particularly expecting great surprises out of this tox study. But the devil is in the detail. It's really the pathology we get at the end of the study that's the most important data. So the sort of big picture, where, for example, whether any of the animals are passing away along the course of the study, or whether they're visibly that sort of thing, it tends not to be very discerning information. It's really the labs, the vitals, the pathology that matters. So I'm not going to jinx it today by saying it's all looking great, but I'd say certainly so far so good, where we haven't had any surprises up to now.
There's an announcement made a few weeks ago about unmarketed. What's the goal in relation to that?
Yeah, thanks, Veronica. So the question was around unmarketable parcels and just what we're trying to achieve there. I'd say this is routine housekeeping to some extent. It's something that companies in our position do from time to time. The company has, as of today, approximately 4,000 shareholders, and very, very roughly speaking, about a quarter of those hold what we describe as an unmarketable parcel. That is to say, a package of stock worth less than $500. And there is a cost to this. For example, this AGM, just mailing out notices of meetings, things like that, our registry, a lot of those sort of background costs in the running of the company scale according to the number of shareholders. And sometimes people end up with these very small parcels because they almost forget they hold it. Sometimes the deceased estates and things like that. And if you've only got a pretty small parcel, just the costs of brokerage to sell those shares can make it uneconomic to do anything with them. So companies like ours, from time to time, often offer this as a facility to shareholders as much as anything. It can be useful for the holders of the unmarketable parcels to rationalize their portfolio, and it can be useful for the company because we tend to save a bit of money on housekeeping. Yes, sir.
Am I right in saying that the 200 mils twice a week, as discovered in the MS study, did show toxicology signs? Therefore, at some point, up to 400 mils a week, we're in trouble. Do you know which end of that large spectrum?
Yeah.
Obviously, 25 mils is very low.
Yes.
But you don't really know, do you?
So the question was a little bit about what we call the therapeutic window of the drug. How high can you dose before you start to run into problems of toxicity? And there's both a clinical answer and a non-clinical answer to that, a toxicology study answer to that. Now, the clinical answer is that in some of the earlier multiple sclerosis work, the company get quite high doses of the drug because they wanted to get enough of the drug to get into the brain, and getting drugs into the brain is incredibly challenging. And at those relatively high doses, they started to see some changes in some of the blood parameters. Whether those are great cause for concern is perhaps debatable, but nevertheless, changes started to become evident, and I think the company decided cautiously to back off on those high doses. We're giving doses now in the Duchenne's work that are almost a tenth of what was being given in the multiple sclerosis work, and at the doses we're looking at, we're not so far seeing any concerns at all. Now, also in the 6-month monkey toxicology study, I think from memory, the company saw one animal pass away during that study, or one animal had some issues, right?
Not in the second repeat study.
And not in the repeat study, in the original one. Understood. Look, there were I think there were one or two bumps in the road, let's say, in some of the early toxicology work, and that can just reflect the difficulty of doing these animal studies. The old saying, never work with animals and children. Well, we're doing both. And you sometimes get in these, really logistically very complicated studies, some slightly unexpected results, and sometimes it's just a function of the animal or the lab or just the complex conduct of the study, rather than a reflection of the safety of the drug. So I wouldn't say we have concerns as a result of the earlier toxicology work. I would say the drug actually looks pretty non-toxic. But the current study will reinforce that position.
EMA doesn't need to see those.
They have not asked for it. This is specifically an FDA requirement. So right now, EMA is less focused on this.
And I just point out when we got the notice that there was a month where we got some 10 doses back
Folks, I'm conscious of time. We should get on with the business of the AGM. Maybe time for one more question if anybody's got anything burning. Otherwise, I'm sure we'll have some time at the end of the session to talk more.
Just really quickly, in relation to phase 2B, in the event that God forbid there was, let's say, a child that was having a negative, so we know nothing, does that child potentially withdraw and we notify until the end of the 6 months, or actually a report?
Depends a little bit on circumstances. It's ultimately at the discretion of the clinician whether to suspend treatment for a period of time and just see if things recover, or to permanently withdraw the patient from treatment. Obviously, we do everything we can to encourage clinicians to keep the patients in the study, but their safety has to be paramount. So there's a complex discussion there between the clinician and between our company. So it really depends. Depending a little bit on the circumstances, we will often know that there has been what we call a serious adverse event. Ideally, we find that out without knowing which arm of the study the child was in, so that it doesn't unblind us. And this is common. This happens all the time in clinical studies, everyday thing. There's a lot of statistical techniques that allow us to capture the data up to that point and then exclude what happens afterwards. So we're used to this, and in any given clinical trial, usually a few patients do drop out, and that's the nature of the game.
James, could I jump in just quickly? So grateful to be here with all of you, but just to talk a little bit about patient safety. So we're ready to start this clinical trial, and we didn't have a medic inside, and you really don't want to do an experiment on humans if you don't have your own internal ND doc. Well, as it turns out, that's been largely the world that I've lived in for the past 30 years as a pharmacovigilance expert. So I agreed to step in and be the medical lead for this study, which is to say that when we have an adverse event, it goes to the contract research group that we work with and to me. And so we try to sort that out and understand what's happened, what is in the background, because these are boys that have a particular illness already. So is it related to their underlying disease? Is it related to a concomitant medicine that they're taking? Or is it related to our drug? I'm thrilled to tell you that as of today, everything that we've seen has been perfectly explainable. Nothing has been related to drug that has been serious. The big thing is called a SUSAR, which is serious, related, and unexpected. That's the big thing. And we haven't had any of that, right? The last thing that I would say, I'm also the chairman of the audit committee. So I'm looking out for your safety on two aspects. I'm looking out for your money on the audit committee, and on the medical side, looking out for the safety of these participants into our clinical trial. Again, happy to be here, and met several of you already, and thrilled to be with you.
Thank you, Gil. And look, on that note, I'm going to hand over to Philip Haynes to steer us through the formal part of the meeting. Thank you very much.